Alabama may not have found room for five-star freshman Derrion Reid last year, but their loss could be a huge gain for Porter Moser and the Oklahoma Sooners.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Monday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime college basketball podcaster, Andy Patton. You are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, even as both Isaac and I are starting vacations. We've managed to line them up perfectly so that we're not gone at the same time. So solo show for you all today. We got some fun stuff coming your way later this week. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you that you can check out the show ad-free by listening on Amazon Music. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com and you'll get 50% off your first year. Well, folks, fun show for you all today. It's one of my favorite shows that we did last year as well. We're looking at sophomore breakouts. We're looking at players who were freshmen last year who averaged less than 10 points per game. That was one of the cutoffs we think are going to be able to break out this upcoming season. We picked one player from each of the five power conferences. That's, of course, the SEC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC, and the Big East. And then we also picked one player from outside of the Power Five structure to talk about as well. And again, less than 10 points per game was the only hard and fast rule, but I was also trying to pick not as obvious of players, and there's some exceptions there. One of the players we're going to talk about is a fairly obvious candidate, and we'll talk about some honorable mentions, and there will be some players that many of you think should have been mentioned or should have been honorable mentions or whatever, and that's great. I would love to hear that. Please drop that in the comments, players that maybe we missed or that you think we would have a good opportunity to break out this upcoming season. We're going to start in the SEC, and we're going to start with a guy that many of you probably already guessed after hearing the cold open there, and that would be 6'8" forward Derrion Reid. Reid was perhaps the highest ranked prospect in the 2024 class that we're going to be talking about on this show. I think there's a few other guys that are very close to him in the rankings, but Reid was a guy who top 15 by most of the major recruiting services coming into his freshman year at Alabama. We've seen so many players come to Alabama as highly regarded freshmen. This has become much more of a trend in the Nate Oates era for this Crimson Tide team. And we've seen so many of them thrive right away. Obviously, Brandon Miller is the most notable example, a guy who ballooned his stock all the way into becoming the third pick in the NBA draft, and seen many other players who've had a ton of success after a year in Tuscaloosa. But Derrion Reid just wasn't able to be that guy, and there was some injury stuff for him. He missed some time kind of in the middle of the season. I think starting in January he missed some time. By the time he came back, he'd kind of lost his spot in the rotation. At that point, Bama had gotten Chris Youngblood back, who'd been dealing with some injuries to begin the season, and so Reid just kind of never really got that significant role as a freshman. He played 24 games for Alabama, started 3 of them, played about 14 minutes per game, averaged 6 points, a little under 3 boards, shot 55% on 2-pointers, 26% from 3. So outside of the outside shot, it's not that he was ineffective, really. He just didn't get a lot of playing time. And then again, when the injury went down, he got even less playing time by the time he returned. But now he joins an Oklahoma team staying in the SEC, which is still weird to say out loud, but we're getting used to it. Staying in the SEC, joining Porter Moser in Oklahoma on a team that pretty new look roster. And this Oklahoma team was pretty good last year. They struggled in conference play, but it was the SEC and it was very excellent. But they lost so much of the talent from last year's team, either via the transfer portal or graduation, or of course having Fears become a one and done because of how great he was for this team last year. It's going to be a lot of new faces for the Sooners, and some of them are coming in the transfer portal. They had Nigel Pack from Miami, who I was kind of surprised to find out still had eligibility. Tay Davis comes over from Notre Dame. They had Xavier Brown via the portal as well. They got a 4 incoming freshmen, including a 4-star small forward in Alec Blair, who's the 60th ranked player in this 2025 class. But you got to think that even with the fairly significant amount of talent coming in to this program in Norman, Derrion Reid is going to have a lot of opportunity to look like the player that he was projected to be coming out of high school. I mean, I can't imagine that Porter Moser is not going to give him a serious run early in the season unless he's just really, really struggling, or if somebody else, maybe it's Davis or maybe it's Brown or maybe it's Blair, kind of steps up and just outperforms him. But the thing about Reid is you could kind of play him at either the 3 or the 4. I'll be interested to see what Moser does in his specific offensive system, where I think that Reid could kind of thrive in either spot. But I'm interested, because even if somebody does outperform Reid, if Blair just ends up being great and is like locked in to play the 3, then I think Reid just kind of shifts up to the 4 and can play there. I mean, he's a high level athlete. He can play above and below the rim. Again, the 3-point shot wasn't really there last year, so maybe you park him at the 4 for now. And if that shot shows up, then you can be kind of a small ball 4 and space the floor in a couple of ways. But yeah, I think that this is a guy who, again, projecting a top 15 player in a recruiting class who was fairly effective in a limited role and had some injury issues. It's not exactly like a scalding hot take to project that Derrion Reid is going to be a breakout candidate, but I still think it's worth kind of talking about him here. And I think that, it's gotten lost in the shuffle of the thousands upon thousands of players who have entered the transfer portal and landed somewhere else. Like, it's not always easy to remember where they are and what that might look like. And I think Reid's a guy who could really turn some heads next season. Tons of honorable mentions in the SEC. Jaleel Bethia at Alabama was one that I really considered, and I think could work for a lot of ways, as similar to Reid as a transfer who was a highly regarded player, didn't play all that much at his first stop, but Bethia just didn't look all that good on the floor, so I'll be interested to see if Bama can get much out of him. I thought Jaden Quaintance was too obvious of a pick. He did technically average less than 10 points per game, but I don't think he's flying under the radar by any stretch after transferring to Kentucky. Same with the 2 Arkansas returners, Carter Knox and Billy Richmond. Aiden Sherrill at Alabama is another one, and then a pair from Georgia that I'm going to keep an eye on as well. Somto Cyril, who should step into a bigger role now that Asa Newell is gone, and then Kenan Catchings, who transfers from BYU to Georgia. Didn't get a ton of run last year, but has a lot of athleticism and could be kind of unlocked a little bit in Mike White's offense. Moving over, we'll talk Big Ten next. There's a lot of different candidates in the Big Ten. Again, I didn't want to go with some of the more obvious candidates. Some of the guy that I really like that I think is landing in a quality spot for him, and that's Jacob Cofie, who's transferring from Virginia to USC. Cofie's a 6'10" center. He was a borderline top 100 recruit when he committed to Virginia in the 2024 class, and he played a lot for Virginia last year. 32 games, started 16 of them, played about 21 minutes per game, averaged a little over 7 points, 5.5 or 4.5 boards, little over a steal per game, shot 57% on his 2-pointers, only 24% from 3, but the 6'10" center, you'll take anything you get from beyond the arc from him. Now he joins a completely new look roster for Eric Musselman. And if you're a USC fan and you're just starting to get used to this, you're going to want to keep getting used to it, because this is kind of what was happening towards the end of his tenure at Arkansas too, of just bringing in a lot of veteran guys, a lot of guys with 1 year of eligibility left. So every year your roster is turning over fairly significantly. And that's kind of what it looks like for this year. That team last year, Desmond Claude and Wesley Yates and St. Thomas and so many others that are all out the door now. And now you bring in, Chad Baker-Mazara comes in from Auburn, Rodney Rice from Maryland, Jaden Brownell from Samford, Ezra Usar, from Utah. They got a 5-star freshman coming in Elijah Arenas, of course, the son of Gilbert Arenas. But I also think Jacob Cofie is kind of the addition that's flying a little bit under the radar for them. Again, was very productive last year at Virginia, and in a system that was very slow paced still, even after Bennett left. Coach who took over was the former Charlotte head coach, and he was somebody who played at a super snail's pace. So for Cofie, the 7 points and 5 boards in that kind of offense is, it might translate a little bit better in a faster paced offense for Coach Muss and the Trojans. He's a very, very good defensive player, great rebounder, very active hands, a lot of steals, decent shot blocker as well. And for USC, this was a team their undoing last year in a lot of ways was not having any real physicality in the front court. They had a really big backcourt Claude and everybody else. Well, it's a bunch of 6'5", 6'6" guys in the backcourt, but they only really had like one center, and he wasn't much of a rim protector, wasn't much of a physical kind of specimen down low. So I think Cofie steps into that role and can really thrive in this system. I think there's a good opportunity for him to be a really big piece for this USC team. I'm not ready to crown USC as a big. I got burned on that last year. For those of you who recall, I had a bold prediction about USC being much better than the preseason rankings, and they were in fact not better than their preseason rankings. So I'm going to hold off on making any sweeping predictions about USC, but I will say that I think Jacob Cofie is going to turn a lot of heads his sophomore season in Southern California. Honorable mentions here, again, most of them were just guys that I thought were a little too high profile. Daniel Jacobson from Purdue, Morez Johnson Jr., who's transferring to Michigan, Bryson Tucker from UW. I thought about him a lot. I think he's a fun addition over there for the Huskies. And then Raquise Passmore transferring from Kansas to Maryland for this upcoming season. Well, folks, Bill Self's team, speaking of Kansas, they will be led this year by star freshman Darren Peterson. There's no doubt about that. But it's a sophomore standout in the front court that could determine how high this ceiling is. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, do you ever just wish managing your money felt a little bit easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning for a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's kind of like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility of and control over your finances. And Monarch Money is more than just a generic budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. I found that I really love having everything in one spot. I don't like having to use 3 different apps or have a spreadsheet where I'm pulling data from different apps and putting it on there. I just want to go to one spot, have everything all collected there. And that's what makes Monarch Money so simple. It makes managing that day-to-day just so simple. So take control of your finances by using Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com and you'll get 50% off for your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast. We're still talking sophomore breakout candidates for the upcoming college basketball season. We talked about our SEC and Big Ten candidates in the first segment, Derrion Reid at Oklahoma and Jacob Cofie from USC. And now here in the second segment, we're talking Big 12 and ACC. And while the first 2 players we talked about were transfers, Reid transferring from Alabama to Oklahoma and Cofie transferring from Virginia to USC. Here in the second segment, we're talking about 2 returners who are staying at their same schools. We'll start with the Big 12. Again, many of you probably guessed who we're talking about here. And I mentioned at the top that we're trying to not do super obvious or well-known candidates. I did break the rule for the Big 12. I will admit that because we're talking Flory Bidunga here, who's probably the most notable player, rising sophomore kind of breakout candidate in the country, outside of maybe Christian Anderson at Texas Tech, maybe Quaintance, maybe a few other candidates that we're not going to talk about, like Isaiah Evans would be another one that he's not our pick for the ACC because of how well known he is. But it was hard to deny Bidunga because he has such an obvious path to more playing time in Kansas because of the departure of Hunter Dickinson, who was not actually at Kansas for 5 or 6 years, although it felt like he was there forever, and kind of clogging up stuff for Kansas. I mean, I don't think it's at all fair to blame the entirety of Kansas's issues the last couple of years on Hunter Dickinson. That's, again, not fair. But I do think that this opens them up to be able to do things a little bit differently. Dickinson was somebody who commanded the ball, and when he was on, he was great. But when he wasn't on, it could really clog up the offense, and the defense wasn't really a big factor for him. And I think Bidunga is going to be somebody who is incredibly efficient. I mean, we saw that last year. He shot 70%, 69.8%. Like, that's a rounding error. That's 70% from the field last year on, a relatively small sample because he only played 16 minutes a game. But he played 34 games for the Jayhawks. He started 6 of them, averaged 6 points, 5.5 rebounds in 16 minutes per game. That is incredible levels of efficiency. And that's not even mentioning 1.6 blocks. 1.6 blocks in 16 minutes per game. This dude is an enforcer around the rim. He is a high-level rim protector, a great finisher around the cup, super athletic for his size at 6'9". And now, with Dickinson out the door, with Adams not going to be playing this upcoming season, we didn't see a ton of additions for Kansas in the front court. They do bring in a French center who's coming in for his freshman year, Paul Mabia. But other than that, this is not a team that has a ton of players who are going to challenge Bidunga for playing time. Part of the question is how does he look playing, probably not double the minutes he played last year. That would be 33 minutes per game. I don't think he's quite at that, but what does he look like playing 27 minutes a game, 28 minutes a game? Maybe it is 30 minutes a game. Can he kind of stay that level of efficient? You don't need him to be 70%, but you'd love him to be 65. You'd love him to be able to do that and still block 2+ shots per game. I don't have a whole lot of doubt that Flory Bidunga can do that. And like we said in the teaser, this is Darren Peterson's team. Like that is not debatable whatsoever. Darren Peterson is going to be one of the best players in college basketball this upcoming season, a very strong candidate to be the number 1 overall pick in the 2026 NBA draft. That dude is really good. But having a rim runner like Bidunga, somebody that you can get the ball to on the block, who's going to clean up offensive rebounds, and who's going to impact the game defensively, I mean, that's such an incredibly good piece to have alongside him. And then you add in, kind of more traditional role players like Trey White and Melvin Council and Jaden Dawson, all come in via the transfer portal. Like, I think you're looking at a Kansas roster that feels far more kind of equipped to handle what it needs to handle in the Big 12. Does that mean I'm putting this team back at the top? No, because you still got a great Houston team. You still got some serious challenges in Texas Tech and Iowa State, and now a resurgent BYU team with the amount of money they're throwing into that program. But I wouldn't be surprised if Kansas looks significantly better this upcoming season. And that's not to say Dickinson was bad or Harris was bad, but I think that this roster construction serves Kansas much better. And I do think Bidunga is going to be one of the better bigs, not only in the Big 12, but really throughout all of college basketball. Moving on to the ACC, a lot of good candidates. We should do our honorable mentions for the Big 12. Only really 2 other ones that I seriously thought of. Victorious Miller, who's transferring from LSU to Oklahoma State. I like what he did in his time with the Tigers. And then Ja'Kai Howard transferring from Auburn to Utah. We'll be interested to see what he can do with what should be much more run and more playing time for the Utes. Moving down to the ACC, we're talking about Brandin Cummings, the point guard for a combo guard, I should say, for the Pitt Panthers, 6'3" guard. He was really unheralded coming out of high school. I mean, this is a dude who was a 3-star prospect, barely inside the top 150 of the 2024 class, according to 247 Sports. He was 143rd. And yet he picked up a role right away for the Panthers last year. Played in 31 games for Pitt, started 4 of them, played about 16 minutes per night, and was very effective in the time he was on the floor. Averaged 6.5 points per game, 1.5 rebounds, shot just under 38% from 3, and that was on 2.5 attempts per game, which again, 2.5 attempts per game in 16 minutes is pretty good margin. I mean, that's a fair amount of attempts, and he knocked him down at a really high clip. He was also an 82% shooter from the free throw line. And Pitt, they lost kind of their entire backcourt from last year's team. Jalen Lowe hits the transfer portal. He goes to Kentucky. Ish Leggett and Damian Dunn are both out of eligibility and moving on in their professional careers. Those were the 3 guys who played pretty much all of the guard minutes besides Cummings last year. So he gets to step into a role kind of where everything in front of him is vacated. Now, Pitt does go out and get DeMarco Minor from Oregon State, a transfer addition that I think is flying a little bit under the radar. DeMarco Minor was incredibly good last year for the Beavers. He's a very good scorer. He's a good passer. He's a little undersized, and I think that could be a problem for him in the ACC. But I think that lines up well with Minor and Cummings in the backcourt. I think both those guys stepping into like a starting backcourt together will play off each other quite well. Minor's more of a facilitator. Cummings didn't really show a lot of that last year. He's more of a spot-up shooter, get him the ball in positions where he can knock down shots, but Minor loves to drive and dish. He did that a ton for the Beavers. So I think that this is a really solid starting backcourt for Pitt. I worry a little bit about their depth just in terms of their overall ability to succeed next season, but Cummings is a guy who should play twice as many minutes or close to it as he did last year. And in a role where he's playing 28, 30 minutes a game, I wouldn't be surprised if he's scoring 13, 14, 15 points per game. If he shoots close to 40% from 3, he's a guy who could sneak into like all ACC second or third team conversation after being a guy who 2 years ago was a 3-star, really completely unheralded prospect out of high school. So it's a fun story to track here for this Pitt team, and a guy that I think could really turn some heads in his sophomore season. The honorable mentions here, obviously, you have Isaiah Evans from Duke. You also have Connie Ruths from Louisville. I thought long and hard about putting him in there. I'm just not sure what that playing time is going to look like. Jonathan Powell transferring from West Virginia to North Carolina. Again, not quite sure on what the role is going to look like for Powell at North Carolina. And he's more of a defensive prospect, so I don't think the numbers are going to pop in a major way for him with the Tar Heels, but I think he's a very good player, and I think he's going to be a nice player for that North Carolina team. But yeah, I think Evans would be the most obvious pick here, but it felt a little too obvious. Again, knowing that Bidunga was also a little bit too obvious, but wanted to highlight somebody else here. And I thought Cummings was a guy that probably didn't get as much love as he should have last year. And for anybody who's pretty plugged into the ACC, I don't think it'll shock them when he steps into a much bigger role this season, considering all the departures in that Pitt backcourt. Well, Ed Cooley didn't have to look too hard to find a replacement for his one-and-done big man, Thomas Sorber. We're going to talk about who that is and what that could look like for the Hoyas next year, coming up in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast. We're closing out the show, talking about our 2 other sophomore breakout candidates, one of them in the Big East, and then one of them from every other conference in college basketball outside of those Power 5. So we'll start with our Big East candidate here. We're going with Julius Halifanoa, who was a center prospect for the Georgetown Hoyas. 7-footer, was the 60th ranked player in the 2024 class at 247 Sports, an international prospect from New Zealand. And unfortunately, he's one of the few on this list who was significantly impacted by injuries. Again, we didn't consider Daniel Jacobson or a few other guys who had injury issues, but Halifanoa only played 6 games last year for Georgetown. In those 6 games, he averaged 3 points, 2 boards, and half a block. He was only playing 13 minutes per game, and I think as the season was going on, even if he had stayed healthy, I don't think that we were going to see him put up his numbers weren't going to dramatically change. All 6 of the games he played last year were in November. His final game was November 26th. But by that point, Sorber had already established himself. The veteran guys on that team were already kind of playing the roles. I think had Halifanoa stayed healthy all season long, the numbers that you saw in those first 6 games probably would have been fairly similar to what we would have gotten. Maybe 4.5 points a game, 14, 15 minutes per game. But he still would have been in line to be an obvious breakout candidate for his sophomore year, even if he hadn't had that injury, because the guy who was in front of him, Thomas Sorber, he's gone. He goes out of the NBA. He's a first-round pick. What an incredible incredible freshman season for him at Georgetown. And now they got a gap. They got a space. And they did add a player in the transfer portal in the front court, Vincent Iwuchukwu, coming over from St. John's, previously was at USC, and he's a 7'1" center. I mean, he's a true 5. So that's some competition for Halifanoa, but not enough competition in my mind to not have Halifanoa in this spot. It's possible that Iwuchukwu starts over Halifanoa. That wouldn't shock me, but I still think Halifanoa is going to play much more than he did last year, obviously in the small sample size that we got from him. And he's a guy who looked really, really good prior to coming to Georgetown. I mean, he played really well in Basketball Without Borders and for the team, New Zealand's national teams. And he's a 7-footer. He's 270 pounds. He's a monster. He's a really, really big dude. He moves pretty well for a player at his size. He's also a really good passer. He's kind of got this connecting big skill set that, he's not like Danny Wolf in the sense he's not handling the ball like that, but he can read the situation. He can make good passes. He can find backdoor cutters. And he's just such a load physically that I think that it's hard to imagine, as long as the conditioning is there and the decision-making is there, it's kind of hard to imagine he's not very impactful, even if he's not scoring 15 plus points per game. He represented New Zealand in the FIBA U19 tournament, the same tournament where we saw Christian Anderson, the same tournament where we saw Morez Johnson and Daniel Jacobson and some of those other players that we've been talking about. And for New Zealand, Halifanoa averaged 10.5 points, 5.5 boards, 2 assists, 1.6 blocks. That was in about 20 minutes per game. So definitely showed some flashes of greatness for that team. My honorable mentions here, I kind of wasn't sure what to do with Fedor Zugic. Most places don't list his grade. like he was a first year last year at Creighton, but I think because of his age, he may not have 3 more years of eligibility. So decided not to count him, but mention him here. Also, his teammate, probably the most notable player from the Big East in this qualification, would be Jackson McAndrew, who I think is going to step into a much bigger role for this Blue Jays team, especially as we kind of see the health situation for Owen Freeman coming into the year. And then also got to mention Royce Parham from Marquette. Pretty safe bet to go with somebody with Shaka Smart's team. I mean, they have a next man up mentality, unlike any team in college basketball outside of maybe Purdue. We've seen that with Cam Jones. We've seen that with Tyler Kolek. We've seen that with Oso Ighodaro, just guys who bide their time, and after year 2 or 3, they just blossom. Royce Parham was pretty good as a freshman last year. He's going to step into a bigger role for this Marquette team with Jones moving on to the NBA. So he's a pretty logical candidate to talk about here as well. Last but not least, talking about our non-power conference candidates here, and there's a ton of them. I limited my honorable mentions to just a few, but I kind of always knew who I really wanted to talk about here, and it's Tyrone Riley IV. Tyrone Riley IV playing at San Francisco this upcoming season. He was a freshman for the Dons last year, 6'6" small forward, just outside the top 100 in that 2024 class, but he made a name for himself immediately for Coach Chris Gerlofson and the Dons. Started all 34 games for USF last year, played 28 minutes a night, 9.6 points per game, so just under that 10 points per game threshold. Also averaged 6 boards, 1.2 steals, and an assist. 3-point shooting dipped as the year went on. He was like 35, 37% most of the year, and then kind of struggled down the stretch. Ended up finishing the year at just over 32%, but he shot over 61% on his 2-pointers. He's a hellraiser in transition, super high-level athlete, good passer for his size. Just has great positional size for a wing, especially in the WCC. And one stat that really stood out to me, as we have used this FIBA U19 tournament to justify some of our picks here, like Halafanoa and like our talks about Christian Anderson previously, I think it's incredibly notable that Tyrone Riley was reportedly the last player cut from Team USA. A Team USA roster that featured primarily power conference players or incoming freshmen who are super highly regarded like Dibansa, or 2026 prospects like Tyron Stokes. And for Tyrone Riley, a guy who wasn't a top 100 prospect, who played at a mid-major school, like that is really impressive that he came this close to making Team USA's roster. If he was on that team, people would have been like, I don't even know who the heck this guy is. And yet he was that good and that impressive at that camp. And this is a guy who he entered the transfer portal after his freshman year at San Francisco, and pretty much immediately he started getting calls from the bluest of the blue bloods. There was a lot of smoke that he was going to Kentucky. Like that's what was happening. He's going to Kentucky. He's going to go play for Mark Pope. And then very surprisingly, Tyrone Riley withdrew from the transfer portal and stayed at San Francisco. That is extremely rare in this era, to stay at a program like San Francisco, which San Francisco is great. They were in the tournament a few years ago. They've been a steady 20-plus win team. They're frequently on the bubble. Like it's not a destitute program or anything like that. Really darn hard to make the NCAA tournament out of the WCC if you're not named Gonzaga or St. Mary's. And so for Tyrone Riley to stay at this school is a huge sign of faith in the coaching staff. And I think, you're looking at a team that lost Malik Thomas. He transferred going to Virginia next year. They lose Marcus Williams, who's playing for the Miami Heat in the summer league. Those were their 2 best players last year. So you lose those 2 guys. Now you have some opening in the backcourt. Robbie Beasley is going to step into that starting point guard role. They go get a former McDonald's All-American and Mookie Cook out of the transfer portal from Oregon. But I think Tyrone Riley is going to be the dude who kind of has the keys to the kingdom for this Dons team. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him average 15 plus points per game. In fact, I one of my hot takes is everybody says, it's either going to be Graham Ike or Paulus Morauskas for Player of the Year in the WCC. I wouldn't be shocked if it's Tyrone Riley. And yeah, you probably don't get Player of the Year if your team finishes 3rd or lower in the conference. But I wouldn't be shocked if San Francisco is good enough to finish 2nd. And if they do, and Tyrone Riley puts up 17 plus points per game, he's probably your Player of the Year. Tons of honorable mentions here. We do have another honorable mention from the WCC. That would be Mikey Lewis, who's going to step into a much bigger role for St. Mary's following the departures of Augustus Marcelonis and Mitchell Saxon and a few others from that team last year. Also, Farrell Compton from San Diego State. I didn't count Magoon Guath. He's technically a red shirt, so that was why he didn't count, but obviously he's a candidate there as well. Jaden Glover transferring from St. John's to St. Joe's. He only averaged 2 points per game last year, but he was a top 60 recruit and just didn't play for a very loaded St. John's team. I think he could be a piece to keep an eye on for St. Joe's. Pearson Carmichael was very good last year for Boise State and should step into a bigger role. And then Aiden Tobiasen from Temple is our last one there, but there are so many others that we could have mentioned. However, that is going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Like I said, one of my favorite shows every year. Excited to see how these 6 guys do this upcoming season and which of them really do step into that breakout role, which ones maybe we're a year early on, or maybe it's just not straight up not going to happen for them. That could be the case, but excited to see how that all plays out. Thanks again, folks, for listening. I always appreciate that. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. Find us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community as well. I got another show for you all on Tuesday, working on lining up a guest for that one. And then Isaac and Leaf will be back with you all starting on Wednesday. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. I guess apologies to the Jacobson family as well. Cheers to the McBruins. Let's go Wild Popes. And until next time, peace out.